Hello, I'm Richard Jacobs, a professor of public administration at Villanova University, located 12 miles west of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. At Villanova, I've taught leadership ethics for the past 25 years. The topic of this video is, how are ethical decisions made? And in it, I detail the elements of ethical decision-making as a process. So let's begin examining that process and its elements, shall we? When it comes to making decisions about how to conduct themselves in dilemmas, human beings can make decisions falling into three general categories. These include the things an agent ought not to do, the things an agent might either do or not do, and the things an agent ought to do. Ethics doesn't focus upon those things an agent ought not to do, if only for the reason that engaging in proscribed conduct promises neither the development of virtue nor the achievement of true happiness. To do so is both unreasonable and unprincipled, so let's not go there. Ethics also doesn't focus upon those things an agent might either do or not do, because in the absence of a compelling reason or evidence in either direction, what ethicists call dubious situations and circumstances, an agent shouldn't do that. The proper focus of ethics is those decisions regarding what agents ought to do. These oughts provide the foundation upon which what otherwise would be ordinary acts are elevated through a rational principle into ethical acts, which improve the quality of life both for oneself as well as for others. What precisely is conduct, and how does it take ethics into consideration? For ethicists, conduct is action. And for human beings in particular, action through which they consciously control and deliberately will the good, that is, what ought to be. Through such reflection, human beings give ethical significance to their existence. However, some conduct doesn't require deliberation. For example, eating a meal, taking a walk, or shopping for food. Ethicists call conduct like this an act of man, and is of little or no consequence, ethically speaking. But when conduct proceeds from deliberation, it transforms what's called an act of man into a human act. That is, one's conduct evidences a complex psychological process, one integrating wish, intention, deliberation, choice, consent, action, and enjoyment. For example, preparing a special dinner for one's spouse to celebrate a wedding anniversary, taking a walk with a son or daughter to discuss a problem that's cropped up and needs to be addressed. Both of these scenarios represent conduct that can be of immense consequence, ethically speaking. These human acts disclose an agent's character, a person who yields to the attractiveness of the ought by committing oneself to it, and reveals what ought to be through one's conduct. Voluntariness, then, is the primary characteristic of a human act, because an agent wills it. That is, the act proceeds from the will that's being directed by knowledge of the desired end, which guides an agent's deliberation. Thus, the decisive point differentiating an act of man from a human act is the free consent of the will following deliberation by the intellect. One consequence of voluntariness is that the agent bears full and personal responsibility for one's choices, illuminating an agent's self-determination as well as human dignity. That is, one's freely willed conduct is caused by a human being who's a self-governing agent, someone who could have acted otherwise, but freely chose not to do so in order to exhibit a virtuous character and to experience true happiness that's to be derived from doing what virtue dictates. For public administrators, the challenge involves studying ethical theory, formulating rational principles, and judging their efficacy for professional practice, and then organizing these principles into what ethicists call an ethical stance that they then apply to their private life and public work as public administrators. This is the stuff of ethical leadership, which requires public administrators to be sufficiently mature, as their primary concern ought to be the acquisition of virtue not skills and techniques, and the development of character, not expertise. Since the stark choices presented by ethical dilemmas conflict with one another, no matter what course of conduct a public administrator chooses, there will be remorse, regret, and sometimes even guilt. That's why acquiring virtue and rooting it in one's character come at the price of forming what ethicists call ethical residue. Why so, you might be wondering? These powerful emotions figure prominently in ethical dilemmas, and rightly so, because the public administrator must sacrifice one good for another. When rendering a decision about what's to be done to resolve an ethical dilemma, those negative feelings, the experiential component of ethical decision-making, will be challenged, and the public administrator must respond to those challenges, because those negative feelings aren't irrational, but based upon a belief that the public administrator has done something wrong, and for this reason, the public administrator must take full personal responsibility for. The public administrator must own the decision. While these negative feelings are understandable on a personal level, deliberation, what's called the cognitive component of ethical decision-making, provides the public administrator intellectual justification for which this individual bears full personal responsibility. When a decision causes harm, and it's likely that any decision made in response to an ethical dilemma will cause some harm to some constituent or some constituency group, it's entirely natural that the public administrator will experience some ethical residue. Even if to outsiders it's obvious, the public administrator bears no ethical responsibility for that harm. Human beings aren't so finely tuned, however, that they can turn such powerful emotions on and off like light switches in water faucets. And it's good that human beings are like this, not only because the degree of negative feeling depends very much upon the agent's perception of ethical responsibility, but also because these negative feelings make agents more cautious about making decisions, more sensitive to duty and responsibility, more empathetic to the plight of others, and more aware of the impact a decision will have upon other human beings. In the end, ethical decision-making is about virtue and honor, not as others judge that, but as public administrators' decision-making process. The decisions made and subsequent conduct reveal a character that's full of virtue and honor.